The dedicated nurse cared for the millionaire for 25 years. On his wedding day with the model, a letter from the past destroyed everything. Clara Whitman stepped into the grand foyer of the Hale mansion, the familiar scent of lavender and fresh linens enveloping her like a warm blanket. The house was alive with activity, a flurry of wedding preparations that buzzed around her like bees in a garden. The halls, usually quiet, were now filled with laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses and the gentle rustle of satin and lace as the wedding party flitted about, each person swept up in the excitement of the day. Yet, amidst the celebratory chaos, a heavy weight pressed on Clara's heart, a bittersweet reminder of the years she had dedicated to caring for Jonathan Hale. Today was supposed to be a day of joy, a momentous occasion marking Jonathan's marriage to the stunning Lila HeartEchoes model whose beauty could only be rivaled by the brightness of her smile. But as Clara moved through the mansion, adjusting flowers and ensuring that every detail was perfect, her mind wandered back to the countless hours she had spent by Jonathan's side since his accident. Each day had blended into the next, a routine of care, compassion, and silent longing. She had been a nurse, a confidant, and a friend, but never more than that. Clara, Jonathan's voice echoed through the hall, pulling her from her reverie. He appeared at the top of the grand staircase, looking dapper in a tailored suit that highlighted his strong shoulders and handsome features. His hair, once tousled and carefree, was now neatly styled, and a broad smile lit up his face, one that Clara had seen many times over the years. It was a smile that spoke of hope and new beginnings. "Jonathan," Clara replied, forcing a smile to her lips, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You look wonderful." "Thank you. I can't believe the day is finally here," he said, descending the stairs with an ease that belied the struggles he had faced. "I just needed to check if everything was ready. Lila will be here any minute." Clara nodded, her heart sinking a little at the mention of Lila. The model was everything Clara was not: brilliantly beautiful, poised, and effortlessly charming. Everything is in place. The flowers are arranged, the guests are arriving, and the cake. "Well, it's stunning," she said, gesturing towards a dining room where a towering masterpiece of sugar and cream awaited the couple. Jonathan chuckled. "You always make sure everything is perfect, don't you?" "I don't know what I'd do without you, Clara." As he stood there, radiating happiness, Clara felt a familiar pang of longing mixed with sadness. She took a step closer, reaching out to adjust the collar of his shirt, a simple act that felt charged with unspoken words. "I'm just doing my job," she replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your job." Jonathan laughed lightly, shaking his head. "You're more than that to me. You've been my rock, my support. I wouldn't be here today without you." "Just remember to breathe," Clara said, trying to keep her tone light, but the weight of her emotions threatened to spill over. "It's a big day." "I'll be fine. I have Lila and I have you," he replied, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Let's make this day unforgettable." With a final smile, Jonathan turned and walked away, leaving Clara standing there, her heart heavy with the knowledge of her place in his life. She was the caretaker, the one who helped him through the darkest days, but she would always be on the sidelines, never stepping into the light where Lila shone. As she busied herself with the decorations, her thoughts drifted to the envelope she had seen earlier, tucked away in Jonathan's study. The envelope bore the name Beatrice, a name that seemed to echo through her mind like a haunting melody. Clara hesitated, wondering if she should leave it alone, but curiosity gnawed at her. What could it contain? She felt a shiver run down her spine as she recalled the way Jonathan had mentioned Beatrice in passing, a name that carried a weight of nostalgia and regret. After a few moments of inner turmoil, she made her way to the study, her heart racing as she entered the room. The air inside was cool, the sunlight streaming through the large windows, casting warm patterns across the floor. Clara's gaze landed on the ornate desk, her breath catching as she spotted the envelope lying innocently among the scattered papers. With trembling hands, she picked it up, the paper crinkling softly as she turned it over. The handwriting was elegant, almost familiar, and she felt an inexplicable urge to open it. What harm could it do? She whispered to herself, her heart pounding in her chest. But a voice at the back of her mind warned her of the secrets that could unravel, the truths that might change everything. Clara took a deep breath, her fingers carefully peeling open the seal. As she unfolded the letter, the soft rustle of paper filled the silence around her. The words danced before her eyes, and she felt herself being pulled into the past, to a time when Jonathan was not the man she knew, but a man full of dreams and desires, a man who had loved and lost. The letter spoke of promises made under starlit skies, of hopes dashed by circumstance, and of a love that had lingered like a shadow over Jonathan's heart. Beatrice had poured her soul into those lines, expressing her longing, her heartbreak, and her understanding of the choices that had torn them apart. Clara's heart ached as she read the words, each sentence a reminder of the life Jonathan could have had, a life that might have included Beatrice. Clara, Jonathan's voice broke through her thoughts, and she quickly folded the letter, her heart racing as she turned to face him. Hey, I was just checking the decorations in here, she stammered, forcing a smile as she tucked the letter into her pocket. Everything looks great, right? Jonathan raised an eyebrow, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. You seem a bit off. Is everything okay? Of course. Just a little nervous, I suppose, she replied, trying to sound casual, though her heart felt heavy. It's a big day for you. It's a big day for all of us, he said with a grin, but Clara could see the flicker of worry in his eyes. I want everything to go perfectly. I don't want to disappoint Lila. You won't, Clara assured him, her voice steady despite the turmoil brewing inside her. You've worked hard for this day. Just focus on being happy. Jonathan nodded, but Clara could see the shadows of doubt crossing his face. I know I should be excited, but I can't help but think about the past. About Beatrice. The mention of Beatrice sent a jolt through Clara, and she struggled to maintain her composure. The past is just that, Jonathan. You have a future now, a bright one with Lila. Focus on that. He sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. You're right. I just wish things could have been different, you know. Sometimes I wonder about the choices I made. Clara felt her heart twist at his words, the weight of the letter pressing heavily in her pocket. But you can't change the past. All you can do is move forward. Yeah, I guess, he said, a hint of uncertainty lingering in his voice. Thanks for always being here, Clara. I don't know what I'd do without you. As he turned to leave, Clara felt a mixture of gratitude and sorrow flooding her soul. She had spent years by his side, but now, as he prepared to step into a new life with Lila, she felt as if she was slowly fading into the background. I'm always here, she whispered to herself, the words heavy with meaning as she watched him walk away, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Clara sat in a quiet corner of the opulent Hale mansion, the air thick with the fragrance of fresh flowers and the distant sound of. Entered the room, her presence instantly commanding. Jonathan, where are you? The guests are starting to arrive. She paused, her gaze narrowing as she took in the scene before her. Clara, what are you doing here? This is no time for you to be meddling. Mom, I was just helping Dash, Jonathan began, but Margaret interrupted him. Helping? Or are you trying to ruin my son's wedding? She snapped, her tone sharp and unforgiving. You have no place in this life, Clara. You know that. Clara's heart sank at the venom in Margaret's words. She had always felt the disdain from Jonathan's mother, but today it felt particularly cutting. I'm just trying to ensure everything goes smoothly for Jonathan, Clara replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Smoothly? You mean to say you're trying to remind him of his past? This is a day for new beginnings, not a trip down memory lane. Margaret's voice rose, and Clara felt a wave of shame wash over her. Mom, please. Jonathan interjected, his voice strained. It's not what you think. Clara found something important, and I need to process it. Important? What could possibly be important enough to overshadow your wedding? Margaret's eyes hardened, and Clara felt the weight of her judgment pressing down on her. Beatrice, Jonathan said quietly, the name hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Margaret's face twisted in anger. That woman, she has no business coming back into our lives. You're marrying Lila today, Jonathan. Focus on that. Clara's heart raced as she watched the confrontation unfold. She felt like a bystander in a storm, helpless and fragile. I never meant to cause any trouble, she whispered, stepping back. Margaret's gaze turned to her, icy and unyielding. Then leave this room. Now. With a heavy heart, Clara turned away, the tension in the room suffocating. She walked out into the hallway, her mind racing. She had only wanted to help Jonathan, to ensure he had a chance to face his past so he could embrace his future. But now, everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. As she wandered aimlessly through the mansion, she felt a mix of regret and determination. The letter had unearthed feelings that could not be ignored. Jonathan deserved to know the truth about his heart, and she had to make sure he understood the depth of their connection before it was too late. In the midst of her thoughts, Clara found herself standing in front of a large window overlooking the garden. The sun cast a golden hue over the flowers, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where she and Jonathan could have been more than just caregiver and patient. But that wasn't the reality they lived in. Jonathan was about to marry Lila, and she was just a nurse who cared for him. Clara, Jonathan's voice broke through her reverie, and she turned to see him approaching, his face a mixture of urgency and concern. Jonathan, I need to talk to you, he interrupted, glancing back toward the room where his mother waited. In private. Her heart raced as she nodded, and they stepped into a small alcove just off the main hallway, away from prying eyes. What's going on? Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't get this letter out of my head, he confessed, running a hand through his hair. It's made me question everything. I thought I was ready to marry Lila, but now you're not so sure, Clara finished for him, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his eyes. He nodded, his expression tormented. I don't want to hurt anyone, especially not Lila. But reading about Beatrice, it brought back so many memories. I don't know what I want anymore. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Jonathan, you need to be honest with yourself. You can't just push away those feelings. They're a part of your history, but they don't have to dictate your future. He looked at her, his gaze penetrating. And what about you, Clara? Where do you fit in all of this? I've always been here, she said, her voice trembling. But I've also accepted my place in your life. I never wanted to come between you and your happiness, but I can't deny how I feel anymore. I've cared for you for so long, and it's hard to watch you move on without addressing what we have. The air between them crackled with tension, and Clara felt the heat rising in her cheeks. She had never been this honest with him before, and it both terrified and exhilarated her. I don't know how to navigate this, Jonathan admitted, his eyes searching hers. I feel lost. Then let's figure it out together, Clara urged, her heart pounding in her chest. We owe it to ourselves to be honest about our feelings. You deserve to choose what you truly want. Just as their conversation reached a critical point, the sound of laughter echoed down the hall, shattering the moment. Clara's heart sank as she remembered the wedding that was supposed to take place. The reality, Clara stood in the lavishly decorated hallway of the Hale mansion, her heart heavy with the weight of the letter she had just read. The vibrant colors of flowers and the soft glow of fairy lights seemed to swirl around her, yet all she could focus on was the envelope with Beatrice's name scrawled across it. She had found it tucked away among Jonathan's accessories, and the moment she opened it, everything changed. The secrets of the past, long buried, were now vying for attention at the worst possible moment. She had always known that Jonathan had a life before the accident, a life filled with love and dreams. But reading those words, Beatrice's words had shattered the fragile peace she had built over the years. Clara's thoughts raced as she tried to process what she had just learned and what it meant for the upcoming wedding. She felt a mixture of dread and compassion, realizing that she had to confront Jonathan about the letter. But how could she ruin his special day? Just then, Jonathan entered the hallway, his face beaming with excitement. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled. Clara's heart sank. He looked so happy, so ready to embark on this new chapter with Lila. She felt like a ghost in that moment, an intruder in a life that was never hers. "Clara," Jonathan called out, his voice warm and inviting. "You've outdone yourself. Everything looks perfect." "Thank you, Jonathan," she managed to reply, forcing a smile. As she adjusted his tie, her fingers trembled slightly. "I just want everything to be memorable for you and Lila." He caught her gaze, and for a fleeting moment, there was a spark of understanding between them. "I couldn't have done this without you. You've always been there for me." Clara's heart ached. "I'm just doing my job," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The weight of her feelings threatened to spill over, but she swallowed hard, refusing to let the emotions surface. As she finished adjusting his attire, Clara felt a surge of courage. "Jonathan, can we talk for a moment? It's important." She hesitated, glancing at the letter still clenched tightly in her hand, hidden from his view. "Of course. Is something wrong?" His brow furrowed with concern, but Clara hesitated. How could she ruin this moment for him? "Let's find a quiet place," she suggested, leading him to a secluded corner of the mansion, away from the bustling preparations. The music from the band tuning up for the ceremony filtered softly through the walls, but in that moment, it felt like they were in a world of their own. Once they were alone, Clara took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "I found something," she began, her voice shaky. She pulled out the letter, her fingers trembling as she handed it to him. "It's from Beatrice." Jonathan's expression shifted from confusion to shock as he took the envelope, his hands. Quickly pushed it aside. "I won't stand in his way. If he chooses you, I'll accept it. All I want is for him to be happy." As they stood there, an unspoken connection formed between the two women, an unexpected bond forged in vulnerability and shared concern for Jonathan. They were both fighting for the same man. Yet at that moment, it felt as if they were allies rather than rivals. Clara's resolve solidified. She had done what she felt was right, and now it was up to Jonathan to decide what path he would take. They both wanted him to be happy, even if it meant letting him go. Even as the tension hung in the air, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the day was far from over, and the choices made would echo long after the last note of the wedding music faded away. Clara stood in the elegantly decorated hallway of the Hale mansion, the air thick with the scent of blooming lilies and the distant sound of laughter from the guests arriving for the wedding. Despite the festive atmosphere, a heavy weight settled in her chest. The truth was, she had spent the last 25 years of her life devoted to Jonathan Hale. She had cared for him through the darkest moments after his tragic accident, and now, as he prepared to marry the stunning Lila Hart, Clara couldn't shake off the feeling of impending loss. As she adjusted the cufflinks on Jonathan's crisp white shirt, she caught a glimpse of his radiant smile in the mirror. He looked dashing, the embodiment of a man ready to embrace a new chapter of his life. Clara felt a pang of nostalgia. She had seen him through so many trials, and now she was merely a shadow in the background of his happiness. "You look incredible, Jonathan," Clara said, forcing a smile as she straightened his tie. "I can't believe the big day is finally here." "Thanks, Clara. I couldn't have done this without you," Jonathan replied, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "You've always been there for me." Clara felt a rush of warmth at his words, but the reality of her position stung. She was not just his nurse. She was the woman who had been his confidant, his support system, yet she had never crossed the invisible line that defined their relationship. As she stepped back to admire his polished appearance, her fingers brushed against something unexpected, a crisp envelope tucked between the folds of the suit jacket. Her heart raced as she pulled it out, the name Beatrice printed neatly on the front. Clara's mind raced with memories of Beatrice, Jonathan's first love, whose name had often slipped through the cracks of their conversations, like a ghost haunting the edges of their lives. "Is everything all right?" Jonathan asked, noticing the change in Clara's demeanor. Clara hesitated, the envelope feeling heavy in her hands. "I found this. It's addressed to you. It's from Beatrice." Jonathan's expression shifted instantly, a flicker of surprise mixed with apprehension flashing across his face. "Beatrice? I thought I'd put that part of my life behind me." I don't think you should ignore it," Clara said softly, her heart pounding. "Maybe it's important?" He took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing as he processed the situation. "I don't know, Clara. I thought she was gone for good. What could she possibly want now?" Clara felt a swell of sympathy for him. "Maybe it's something you need to hear. You deserve closure, Jonathan." He looked torn, his gaze darting away from her, lost in thought. "I'll read it later. Right now, we have a wedding to attend." As the ceremony began to draw closer, Clara's unease grew. The excitement in the mansion was palpable. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the envelope held secrets that could alter everything they had built together. The laughter and joy around her felt like a distant echo, overshadowed by the weight of unspoken words. Just then, Margaret, Jonathan's mother, strode into the room, her demeanor as sharp as the pearls around her neck. "Clara, why are you still here? The guests are arriving, and you should be preparing for the ceremony." Clara's stomach dropped. "I'm just helping Jonathan get ready," she replied, her voice steady despite the unease churning within her. "Helping him get ready? I'd rather you stay out of it completely," Margaret retorted, her eyes narrowed. "You've done your part, and now it's time for him to start a new life." Clara felt her face flush, a mix of anger and hurt. "I care about Jonathan, Margaret. I've been here for him when no one else was." Margaret scoffed, crossing her arms. "And you think that gives you a claim on him? He's marrying Lila today, and it's time you accepted that." Clara swallowed hard, the sting of Margaret's words cutting deep. "I'm not trying to claim anything, but I just want what's best for him." "Then step aside and let him be happy," Margaret snapped before turning on her heel and leaving the room, leaving Clara feeling small and vulnerable. With her heart racing, Clara moved away from the noise of the party and found a quiet corner of the garden outside. She needed to think, to process everything that had happened. In her hands, the envelope felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode into chaos. After a moment of hesitation, Clara tore the envelope open, her fingers trembling. Inside lay a single sheet of paper neatly folded. As she unfolded it, she recognized Jonathan's handwriting. His thoughts poured onto the page like an intimate confession. Beatrice had written about their past, her words laden with nostalgia and unresolved longing. Clara's heart ached as she read about their youthful dreams, the promises they made to each other, and the heartbreak of separation that had pushed them apart. Beatrice spoke of a life that could have been, filled with love and laughter, but also of the reality that life had taken a different turn for both of them. "I never wanted to leave you, Jonathan. I wanted to build a life together, but circumstances pulled us apart. I hope you found happiness, but I can't help but wish things had been different," the letter read. Tears welled in Clara's eyes as she processed Beatrice's pain. This wasn't just a letter. It was a window into Jonathan's soul, a glimpse into the love he had lost. Clara felt a surge of protectiveness, knowing that Jonathan deserved to confront these feelings, to understand the weight of his past before stepping into a future with Lila. With a deep breath, Clara made her way back inside, her heart racing with determination. She found Jonathan standing at the edge of the ballroom, a glass of champagne in hand, surrounded by guests. The sight of him, so close yet so far away, made her heart ache. "Jonathan," she called softly, catching his attention. He turned, and for a moment, their eyes locked, an unspoken connection passing between them. "Clara, what is it?" he asked, his expression shifting from lightheartedness to concern. "I need to talk to you. It's important," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Now!" Jonathan glanced around at the bustling preparations. "Can it wait until after the ceremony?" "No, it can't," Clara insisted, stepping closer. "It's about the letter from Beatrice." His eyes widened in disbelief. "You opened it?" "I did, and I think you need to hear what it says. Please, let's step outside." Jonathan hesitated, glancing at the guests milling about, but then nodded. "All right, just for a moment." They moved to a secluded corner of the garden, the sounds of laughter fading into the background. Jonathan crossed his arms defensively, anxiety etched across his face. "What did she say?" Clara took a deep breath. She could see the tension in his posture, the way his jaw clenched. "She wrote about her love for you, Jonathan. She never wanted to leave, and she regrets how things turned out." Jonathan's expression faltered, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I thought I had buried all of that. Why would she bring it up now?" "Because it matters," Clara said softly, her heart racing as she searched for the right words. "You need to confront this before you commit to a life with Lila. You deserve honesty, not just from yourself but from your past. Why do you care so much?" Jonathan's voice was strained, a mix of frustration and confusion. "You're supposed to be happy for me." "I am happy for you, but I can't ignore what's at stake," Clara replied, her voice trembling. "This isn't just about you and Lila. This is about understanding who you are and what you truly want." Just then, Lila appeared at the edge of the garden, her expression curious but concerned. "Jonathan, is everything okay?" she called out, her voice laced with worry. Jonathan glanced at Clara, the conflict evident in his eyes. Clara felt a rush of guilt. She had never wanted to create tension between them, especially not on what was meant to be the happiest day of Jonathan's life. "Everything's fine," Jonathan said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just a little discussion." Lila approached, her brows furrowing as she studied their faces. "I could feel something was off. Are you sure you're all right, Clara?" Clara hesitated, caught between her feelings for Jonathan and the unexpected bond that had formed with Lila. "I'm fine, really. Just wanted to make sure Jonathan was ready for today." Lila's gaze flickered between them, and Clara sensed the uncertainty brewing in her eyes. "I just want us all to be happy. Jonathan deserves that." With a heavy heart, Clara nodded. "You're right. He does." As Lila stepped closer to Jonathan, Clara felt the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. It was a moment of vulnerability for all three of them, two women, caught in the web of love, longing, and the complexities of the heart. "Let's get back inside," Jonathan said finally, his voice steadying. "The ceremony is about to start." Clara swallowed hard, knowing that the future they were all stepping into was fraught with uncertainty. But as she walked beside Jonathan and Lila, she realized that the journey ahead would be marked by choices, and each one of them would have to confront till the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden hue over the landscape as Jonathan walked toward the edge of the sea, the waves crashing rhythmically against the shore. The salty air filled his lungs, and he closed his eyes, hoping to find some clarity amidst the turmoil swirling in his mind. The wedding was supposed to be the culmination of years of healing and hope, a celebration of love and new beginnings. Yet, the revelation of Beatrice's letter had cast a dark shadow over everything, leaving him in a state of confusion. He thought of Clara, who had been by his side for 25 years, a constant in his life since the moment of that fateful accident. She had cared for him through every challenge, every moment of despair, and now, as he faced the reality of his feelings, he felt a profound sense of loss. He stood at the water's edge, his heart heavy with the weight of choices yet to be made. "Why do I feel so lost?" he murmured to himself, the sound swallowed by the roar of the ocean. His thoughts drifted to Lila, the model whose beauty had captivated him, yet now seemed overshadowed by the ghost of a love that might have been. The truth was, he didn't just feel a connection to her. He felt a connection to Clara that he had long ignored, buried beneath layers of obligation and gratitude. Just then, he heard footsteps approaching and turned to see Clara hurrying toward him, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "Jonathan," she called out, her voice cutting through the soft sounds of the waves. "I was worried when you didn't come back inside." "I needed some air," he replied, forcing a smile even as his heart ached. "Just trying to clear my head." Clara took a step closer, her brow furrowing as she studied his face. "You don't look well. The wedding is about to start, and you seem distant. What's going on?" Jonathan sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Clara, he hesitated, the weight of his emotions almost too much to bear. "I don't know what to think right now. The letter, it changed everything." Clara's heart raced as she stepped closer, feeling the tension in the air. "You have to talk to me, Jonathan. I've spent so many years helping you, caring for you. If there's something you need to say, please don't hold back." He looked into her eyes, those deep pools of compassion and understanding that had always been his safe haven. The letter from Beatrice, it made me question everything. I thought I was ready to move on, to marry Lila, but now I'm not so sure. I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads, and I don't know which path to take. Clara took a deep breath, fighting the rising tide of emotions within her. "You loved her once, didn't you? Beatrice? If she's back, it makes sense that you'd feel conflicted." "I did love her," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I had moved on. But now I don't know if I'm making the right choice marrying Lila. She deserves someone who is sure, someone who can give her all of himself." Clara's heart sank, and she could feel the sting of tears threatening to spill. "And what about me, Jonathan? Where do I fit into all of this?" He looked away, the guilt washing over him like a tidal wave. "You've been my rock, Clara. I don't want to hurt you, but I can't deny what I feel. This is all so overwhelming." "Overwhelming for whom?" Clara shot back, a mix of anger and sadness in her voice. "You're the one who has a choice to make. I've been here, but I've always been in the background, supporting you, never asking for anything in return. I've kept my feelings hidden because I thought you needed me as a nurse, not as a partner." Jonathan stepped closer, his heart racing. "What do you mean? I've always appreciated everything you've done for me. I just didn't realize. I never meant to make you feel like you were just a nurse to me." Clara's voice trembled as she spoke, the vulnerability of the moment washing over her. "You were my whole world, Jonathan. I dedicated my life to you. There were times when I thought maybe we could be more than this. But I always pushed those thoughts away because I didn't want to complicate things. I didn't want to lose you." His heart ached at her words, the weight of the truth crashing over him. "Clara, I never wanted you to feel that way. You mean so much to me. You've saved my life in more ways than one. But I can't keep pretending that I know what I want." "Then let's be honest with each other," Clara urged, her voice softening. "What do you truly want, Jonathan? Do you want to be with Lila? Or is there a part of you that feels something deeper for me?" His gaze held hers, and for the first time, he saw her not just as his caregiver, but as the woman who had been there through every trial he faced. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I care about Lila. I do. But there's a bond with you that I can't ignore. I've felt it for so long, but I was afraid of what it meant." Tears glistened in Clara's eyes as she stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest. "Then maybe you need to figure it out, Jonathan, before you walk down that aisle, before you make a promise you might not be able to keep. You owe it to yourself and to Lila too." He nodded slowly, the gravity of her words settling in. "You're right. I need to take a step back and think. I don't want to hurt anyone, least of all you." Clara shook her head, a bittersweet smile forming on her lips. "I never wanted to complicate your life, Jonathan, but I want you to be happy, even if that means it's not with me." Their eyes locked, and in that moment, everything felt suspended in time. Jonathan didn't want. Owe you something. You owe me nothing, she replied, her voice steady but gentle. I've cared for you because I wanted to, not because I expected anything in return. But I need you to understand. You have a choice to make, Jonathan. You have the power to shape your own future. Jonathan felt a tear slip down his cheek, and he wiped it away angrily. But what if I make the wrong choice? What if I hurt you both? Life is full of choices, and they're rarely easy, Clara said, her voice soothing. But whatever you decide, we'll be here to support you. Just be honest with yourself about your feelings. The two stood in silence, the weight of their conversation settling over them like a soft blanket. Jonathan's heart pounded as he realized that Clara was right. He had to confront his feelings, both for Lila and for Clara, and find a way to navigate the tangled web of emotions that now surrounded him. Clara, he started, but the words stuck in his throat, the fear of vulnerability holding him back. Just speak from your heart, Clara encouraged, stepping closer, her presence calming him. Whatever it is, I promise to listen. Taking a deep breath, Jonathan finally let his guard down. I've always cared for you, Clara. You've been my anchor, the one person I could always rely on. But Lila, she represents a life I've dreamed of, a life I thought was possible. Now, with this letter, I don't know what's real anymore. Clara's heart raced at his confession. Jonathan, you deserve happiness, no matter where that leads you. But you must also be honest with yourself and with Lila. You owe it to all of us to be true to your feelings. Jonathan nodded slowly, feeling a sense of clarity wash over him. I know I need to talk to both of you. I can't let this uncertainty continue to cloud my life. I have to face this head on. Clara smiled, a wave of relief washing over her. That's all we ask for, Jonathan. Just be open. We'll figure this out together. As they stood side by side, gazing out at the ocean, Jonathan felt a sense of hope stir within him. He had a choice to make, and he was ready to confront it. The guests at the Hale mansion buzzed with excitement, their laughter echoing through the grand halls that had been meticulously decorated for Jonathan and Lila's wedding. Yet, beneath the surface of this joyous occasion, tension simmered. The ceremony had been postponed, and whispers of confusion and concern rippled through the crowd. Clara Whitman stood in the ornate living room, her heart heavy with guilt and uncertainty. She could feel the eyes of the guests on her, judging her involvement in the chaos that had unfolded. Margaret Hale, Jonathan's mother, was not one to be trifled with. Her sharp gaze scanned the room, landing on Clara with a mix of disdain and accusation. "What have you done, Clara?" she snapped, her voice low but laced with fury. "This was supposed to be the happiest day of my son's life." Clara swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Mrs. Hale. I only wanted to help Jonathan." "Help him?" Margaret scoffed, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "You've been nothing but a distraction. How could you think this was your place? You're his nurse, Clara, not his confidant, not his lover. I've dedicated my life to caring for him, and that means being honest when it matters," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil within her. "He deserves to know the truth about Beatrice." Margaret stepped closer, her expression a mix of anger and incredulity. "You think you're the only one who cares about Jonathan? He's worked hard to build a life for himself, and you want to throw it all away with your meddling." Clara met Margaret's gaze, feeling the weight of the woman's words. "I never wanted to hurt him, but keeping secrets only leads to more pain. He needs to confront his past to move forward." Margaret's face twisted with, tone sharp, "And if you truly cared for him, you would understand that. You're not helping him by complicating his life." "Maybe I'm helping him see the truth," Clara retorted, a mix of defiance and sorrow in her voice. "Maybe I'm helping him find clarity in a world filled with confusion." "Perhaps you're just making it worse," Margaret snapped, her patience waning. "You need to decide what kind of person you want to be, Clara. Are you a nurse or are you trying to be something more?" Clara felt the sting of those words. She had always seen herself as more than just Jonathan's nurse, but in this moment, she felt stripped of her identity. "I just want him to have the love he deserves. If that's with Lila, then I'll step aside. But not before he knows everything." "Then you're a fool," Margaret said coldly, turning on her heel to leave. "This is not your place, Clara. Remember that." As the door closed behind Margaret, Clara felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. She wanted to scream, to cry, to express the turmoil inside her, but all she could do was stand there, feeling utterly alone. She had fought for Jonathan's happiness for so long, and now it seemed that the very act of caring for him had turned her into the villain of the story. Outside, Jonathan wandered through the garden, the vibrant flowers and lush greenery contrasting sharply with the chaos in his mind. He felt trapped between two worlds: the life he had built with Lila and the unexpected emotions that Clara had unearthed. Sitting on a bench, he buried his face in his hands, willing the confusion to dissipate, but it lingered like a shadow. Clara stepped outside, her heart racing as she approached him cautiously. "Jonathan?" she called softly, unsure if he wanted to speak to her. "Can we talk?" He looked up, his eyes reflecting the storm of emotions raging within him. "I don't know, Clara. Everything's so complicated now." "I know," she replied, taking a seat beside him. "But I want to help you sort through this. You deserve to be happy, and that means facing the truth, whatever it may be." "Did you ever think that maybe the truth is too painful?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "What if I'm not ready to confront it?" Clara reached out, gently placing her hand on his. "You've been carrying this weight for so long, Jonathan. Ignoring it won't make it go away. It'll only fester and grow until it consumes you." He sighed deeply, the tension in his body easing slightly at her touch. "I just wanted today to be perfect. I wanted to marry Lila and start a new chapter. But now, everything feels so uncertain." "Sometimes, uncertainty can lead to clarity," Clara said softly. "You have a decision to make, and it's okay to take your time. Just remember, whatever you choose, I'm here for you." Jonathan looked at her, his heart aching with both gratitude and sorrow. I don't want to hurt anyone, Clara. Lila deserves my honesty, but so do you." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. "I'd rather you be honest with yourself. Don't let anyone dictate what your happiness should look like. You have to choose your own path." "Why does it have to be so complicated?" he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "Because life is complicated," Clara replied. Squeezing his hand, Lila sat on the edge of her luxurious bed, the soft silk sheets pooling around her. The sun streamed through the large windows of Jonathan's mansion, casting golden rays across the room. She stared at her reflection in the ornate mirror, her heart heavy with uncertainty. The events of the past few days played in her mind like a haunting melody, echoing the moment she had walked in on Jonathan and Clara in a heated, emotional discussion. She felt the nagging doubt creeping back in, whispering that she might never be enough for him. With a deep breath, she picked up her phone and scrolled through her messages. Clara's face flashed in her mind the way she had stood there, so composed and yet so vulnerable, revealing the truth about Beatrice. It left Lila feeling as though she was standing on the precipice of a cliff, unsure of whether to jump or to retreat. Jonathan's connection with Clara was palpable. It was something she could never fully understand, yet it was undeniably there. Suddenly, an idea struck her. Lila stood up, smoothing out the wrinkles in her dress. She needed to reclaim her identity, to find a way to stand on her own 2 feet without being tied to Jonathan's world. She refused to be the woman who stood in the shadows, waiting for his affection. The thought of being a barrier between him and Clara gnawed at her conscience. "Enough is enough," she said to herself, determination settling in her chest. "I have to value myself more." She left the room, her mind made up. Meanwhile, in the garden, Jonathan was pacing restlessly. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore echoed in the distance, but the beauty of the day was lost on him. His mind was a tangled web of emotions. Clara and the letter from Beatrice had turned his world upside down. He felt torn between the past and the present, between his duty and his desires. Clara had always been there for him, a constant presence that he could lean on. She had nurtured him back to health, both physically and emotionally. But now, with the revelation of Beatrice's past, everything felt different. He longed to be with Clara, yet the shadow of what could have been with Beatrice loomed over him. As he walked along the path lined with blooming flowers, he caught sight of Clara approaching. Her heart sank at the sight of him, clearly troubled. She had been trying to make sense of everything as well. The thought of losing Jonathan made her chest tight. "Jonathan," she called softly, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the ocean. He turned to her, his expression a mixture of confusion and sadness. "Can we talk?" He nodded, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I don't know what to say, Clara. Everything feels complicated." Clara stepped closer, her heart racing. "I know it's a lot to process, but you need to understand that whatever you decide, I just want you to be happy." "Do you really mean that?" he asked, his eyes searching hers for reassurance. "Of course." She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "You deserve to explore every possibility, even if that means letting me go." Jonathan's brows knitted together in disbelief. "But you're part of my life, Clara. You always have been." "Am I?" she countered gently. "Or am I just someone who's been taking care of you? Don't you see? You have a chance to be with someone who can give you everything you might want, someone like Lila." His heart sank at the mention of her name. "Lila? She's wonderful. But there's something about you that I can't just overlook. It's deeper than anything I've ever felt." Clara felt a rush of warmth at his words, but she quickly steeled herself. "But you're confused. I can't let you make a decision based on guilt or obligation. You need to figure out what you truly want." He stepped closer, the air between them thick with unspoken words. "What if I want you?" Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. "Jonathan, I've always cared for you, more than I should have, but I also know that you need to find your own way. You deserve to find happiness, even if that means it's not with me." "Clara," he began, but she interrupted him, her voice trembling. "Please let me go. I'll always be here for you, but you need to choose your own path. I can't be the one holding you back." The distance between them felt insurmountable, even as he reached for her hand. "You're not holding me back. You're the only one who really understands me." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You need to sort through your feelings. I can't complicate your life any further." Jonathan felt a surge of frustration. "But I don't want to complicate things. I just want to be with you." "You have to make a choice, Jonathan. Be with Lila or be with me. But you need to decide for yourself, not because you think you owe me something." Silence enveloped them as the weight of her words sank in. Clara turned away, fighting the urge to look back, knowing that this was the hardest thing she had ever done. Lila was wandering through the spacious halls of the mansion, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she considered her next steps. She had always been the one to chase after dreams, but now it felt like she was running away from one. She needed to confront Jonathan, to clear the air and let him know that she wouldn't stand in the way of his happiness, whatever that looked like. As she approached Jonathan's study, she paused, hearing muffled voices from within. Her heart raced. She could hear Clara's voice, full of emotion, and Jonathan's deep tones responding. Curiosity tugged at her, but she also felt a pang of guilt. Should she interrupt? Instead, she took a step back, leaning against the wall outside the door, listening intently. "Clara, please don't say that." Jonathan's voice echoed through the door. "It's the truth, Jonathan. You need to find out what you truly want. And I can't be the reason you feel trapped." Clara replied, her voice thick with emotion. Lila pressed her ear closer, her heart pounding. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "I don't want to lose you, Clara." "Maybe that's exactly what you need to do," Clara responded softly. Lila's breath hitched in her throat. She had never heard Clara sound so vulnerable, so raw. It was clear that there was a depth to their relationship that she hadn't fully grasped. Taking a step back, Lila made her decision. She was going to approach Jonathan and confront the situation head-on. She refused to let herself be a pawn in a game she didn't understand. When she entered the study, Jonathan was sitting at his desk, his head buried in his hands. Clara was nowhere in sight, and the air felt thick with unresolved tension. "Jonathan," Lila said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling in her stomach. He looked up, his expression startled. "Lila, don't," she interrupted gently. "I need to talk to you. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, and I don't want to be a barrier between you and Clara." His brows knitted together as he absorbed her words. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I don't want to be the reason you're unhappy. I know how you feel about her, and I can't pretend that I'm not affected by that." Jonathan sat back in his chair, the weight of her confession settling heavily on his shoulders. "Lila, I don't want to hurt you. I care about you." "I know you do," she replied, her voice softening. "But I also know that you have a past with Clara that you need to explore. I can't be the one to hold you back. If you have feelings for her, you need to figure that out without me in the way." Jonathan blinked, processing her words. "You're willing to just walk away?" "I'm not walking away. I'm choosing to value myself and my happiness too. I deserve that, just like you do," she said firmly. With a sigh, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "This is all so complicated. I don't even know what I want right now. Everything is just a mess." Lila stepped closer, her heart aching for him. "I know, but maybe you need to take some time to think about it without feeling the pressure of a relationship. If you truly want to be with Clara, then you need to give yourself that chance." He nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. "You're right. I need to sort through my feelings. Just remember, whatever you decide, I want you to be happy." Jonathan looked at her, admiration mingling with sadness in his eyes. "Lila, just promise me you'll think about it," she interrupted, forcing a smile. "You deserve to find your own path." As she left the study, Jonathan felt a mix of emotions swirling within him: gratitude, sadness, and a flicker of hope. He realized that both women had given him the freedom to choose his own destiny, and it was a weight he had to carry alone for a while. In the garden, Clara sat on a bench, her heart heavy with the Clara stood in the dim light of the early morning, the gentle sound of waves crashing against the shore echoing in her ears. The mansion felt like a distant world, one filled with laughter and the promise of new beginnings, but for her, it had become a haunting reminder of what could never be. She had just spent an emotional night wrestling with her feelings for Jonathan, and now, as she prepared to say goodbye, her heart felt heavy with unresolved tension. She glanced back at Jonathan, who was propped against the doorframe, his eyes searching her face for answers she wasn't sure she could provide. His usual confidence was dimmed, replaced by a vulnerability that made Clara's chest tighten. "Clara," he said softly, stepping closer, "I need you to know something before you go." She swallowed hard, the reality of their situation crashing over her like a wave. "Jonathan, we both know this isn't easy," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have so much to figure out. You need to be with Lila, not me." His brow furrowed, and for a moment, Clara thought he might argue. Instead, he looked down, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "I can't just forget everything we've shared," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been my anchor for 25 years. You've cared for me when no one else would, and Stop," she interrupted, holding up a hand. "You can't say that when you're about to marry her. You love Lila, Jonathan. You're just confused." "Confused?" he echoed, his voice rising slightly. "I'm more than confused, Clara. I'm torn apart. I thought I was ready to marry her, but then he paused, his eyes locking onto hers, searching for clarity. "Then you showed me a side of myself I thought I'd lost." Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She brushed them away angrily. That's not fair to either of us. You can't let your feelings for me dictate your choices. You deserve to be happy, and right now, that happiness is with Lila. Is it? He asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Or is it just what I've been told to want? She didn't know how to respond. The weight of his stare was almost unbearable, and the air between them crackled with unspoken words. Finally, she took a deep breath, grounding herself. You need to talk to her. You owe her that much. You owe it to yourself. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his movements. I don't want to lose you, Clara. Not after everything we've been through. Then maybe you need to let me go, Clara replied, her heart breaking with every word. You have to choose, Jonathan. I can't be the reason you hesitate. You need to figure out what you really want. Clara, please, he said, his voice cracking. Just tell me you'll stay, that you'll be here when I figure things out. She shook her head, stepping back as if his words had physically struck her. I can't be your safety net. I need to let you explore what you have with Lila. If she's the one you want, you need to fight for that. Not for me. Silence enveloped them. The only sound the distant call of seagulls. Clara felt as though they were standing on a precipice, and with every passing moment, the chasm between them widened. Finally, Jonathan took a step forward. Desperation etched on his face. Clara, I don't want to live this life without you. You mean too much to me. Do I? Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. You've been my entire life for so long, but you have to decide if I'm more than just a caretaker to you. I can't keep waiting in the shadows, Jonathan. I deserve more than that. He reached out, grasping her wrist. Gently. Then let me show you what you mean to me. Just give me a chance to think this through. Please. Before she could respond, the sudden sound of footsteps broke their moment. Lila appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale and drawn, as if she had been listening. Jonathan, she called, her voice shaky. Is everything okay? Clara felt the tension shift instantly. She pulled her wrist away from his grasp, stepping back as Lila descended the stairs, her eyes darting between the two of them. I overheard. I didn't mean to intrude, but I couldn't help but hear. Lila, it's not what you think, Jonathan began, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Then what is it? Lila interrupted, her voice rising. Because it looks like you two are having a very intimate conversation right before our wedding, and I deserve to know what's going on. Lila, please, Clara said, trying to maintain her composure. This is between Jonathan and me. You don't need to get involved. But I am involved, Lila replied, her voice trembling with emotion. I'm about to marry him. I deserve to know if he's having second thoughts. Lila, I'm not Jonathan began, but Clara interjected. Maybe you should both talk this through, Clara suggested, her heart racing. I think you need to be honest with each other. Lila, you deserve to hear what Jonathan feels. And Jonathan, you need to communicate with her without me in the picture. Lila looked at Clara, confusion swirling in her eyes. You don't have to leave, Clara. I want to understand. Jonathan looked between the two women, his expression a mixture of anguish and indecision. I don't want to hurt either of you, he finally said. But I can't pretend that everything is fine when I'm feeling so lost. Clara's heart sank at his words. Then let me go, Jonathan. Find your clarity without me. I'll be just a phone call away if you need me, but you have to figure this out first. Clara, he started, but she shook her head. No, I refuse to be the reason for your indecision. I've been your nurse, your caretaker, but I can't be that anymore. I need to step back. Jonathan's shoulders slumped, and Lila's eyes filled with tears. You're right, Clara. I can't force you to stay, but I don't want to lose you either, Jonathan said, his voice breaking. Then let me go, Clara whispered, her own voice trembling. Please. With a heavy heart, She turned and walked away, leaving Jonathan and Lila standing in the morning light, the sound of the ocean fading into the distance. As she reached the edge of the property, a ping from her phone broke the silence. She pulled it out and saw a message flash across the screen. It was from Beatrice. "Clara," she read aloud to herself. "I'm back in town. I'd like to meet with Jonathan. There are things we need to discuss." The weight of her decision settled heavily on her shoulders as she looked back at the mansion one last time, her heart aching for what could have been, but knowing that she needed to let Jonathan find his own path, no matter how painful it was for her. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a warm golden hue over the lavish Hale mansion. Clara stood in her small room, her heart racing as she clutched her phone tightly. The message from Beatrice had come as a shock, stirring feelings she thought she had buried deep within. Jonathan's life had been intertwined with hers for so long, and now, the specter of his past was returning to haunt them both. She knew she had to tell him, but the weight of what it might mean for their fragile connection made her hesitate. Clara took a deep breath and walked toward Jonathan's study, her heart pounding in her chest. She found him sitting at his desk, staring out the window as the last rays of sunlight illuminated his features. He looked lost, and for a fleeting moment, she wished she could erase the turmoil that had enveloped him since the arrival of the letter. "Jonathan," she said, softly, stepping into the room. He turned, his eyes reflecting a mix of confusion and hope. "Clara," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about everything about the letter about us." She swallowed hard, knowing that this conversation was going to change everything. "I received a message from Beatrice. She's back in town and wants to meet you." His expression shifted dramatically, the hope in his eyes replaced by uncertainty. "What? Why now? After all these years?" Clara felt a pang of sympathy for him. "I don't know, but she says she wants to clear the air, to explain things. Jonathan, you need to decide what this means for you." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. "I don't even know what I feel right now. It's like I'm caught between two worlds, one with you, and now this unexpected return of someone I thought I'd forgotten." "Maybe it's not about forgetting," Clara replied, her voice steady. "Maybe it's about understanding what you truly want. You deserve that chance." Jonathan stood up, his movements abrupt. "You're right. I have to meet her. But what about you? Where does that leave us?" Before she could answer, he turned away, looking out the window again, lost in thought. "I need to figure this out, Clara. I can't keep running from my past, and I can't keep dragging you into my confusion." Clara felt her heart sink. "I don't want to be a burden or a source of confusion, Jonathan. I just want you to be happy." He turned back to her, his eyes intense. "And what about you? What do you want?" "I want you to find clarity," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I've spent years caring for you, loving you in silence. I just want you to choose the path that brings you peace." With a heavy heart, Clara left the study, letting Jonathan grapple with his thoughts. She found herself wandering the expansive gardens, the fragrant flowers and manicured hedges doing little to calm her racing mind. The weight of the past loomed over her, and she knew that Jonathan needed to confront it head-on. Later that evening, Jonathan met Beatrice at a quaint cafe not far from the mansion, a place they used to visit in their youth. The nostalgic atmosphere was thick with memories, and as he sat at the table, he felt the ghosts of his past swirling around him. Beatrice arrived, her presence striking yet softened by the passage of time. "Jonathan," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she approached. "It's been a long time." "Yeah, it has," he replied, trying to gauge her demeanor. "I didn't expect to see you again, especially not now." She sat down, her eyes searching his. "I know this is unexpected, but I felt it was time to finally talk. There are so many things left unsaid from our past." Jonathan nodded, the memories flooding back happy moments, dreams they once shared and the pain of their separation. "I've thought about you over the years. It's hard not to." "Me too," Beatrice admitted, her voice softening. "I never wanted to hurt you, Jonathan. I always cared about you, but things got complicated." "Complicated how?" he pressed, his curiosity piqued. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "After the accident, things changed for both of us. I felt lost, and I didn't know how to reach out. I thought you'd moved on, and I didn't want to disrupt your life." "You could have reached out," he replied, a hint of frustration in his voice. "I was paralyzed, Beatrice, not emotionally dead. I needed you then." "I know," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I was afraid. I thought I'd be a reminder of what you lost. But I was wrong. I should have fought for us, for what we had." Jonathan's heart raced as he listened. The emotions were raw and real, and he felt the connection they once shared flickering to life. "But why now? Why after all this time?" "Because I've realized that running away from the past isn't the answer," she said.